You know, whenever I hear a religious person say, God and science don't contradict each other, I just roll my eyes because that is quite literally the most copium thing I've ever heard. But of course, these people aren't as bad as young Earth creationists who take the Bible quite literally word for word. But either way, it doesn't sit right with me. In a way, it feels like they're giving credit to God for things that hardworking scientists have accomplished, you know? Anyway, let's take a look at this video.
For some reason, we got this idea in our head that it has to be either God or science. On one side, we say, well, everything we've learned in science kind of disproves and explains away God, so we don't really need God anymore. On the other side, we say, well, I really believe in God, so I'm just going to kind of ignore everything we've learned in science over the past 500 years because, well, science is probably just wrong.
You know what, that's actually kind of accurate. Many religious people simply reject science, but they don't actually reject all of it. It's more like they cherry pick things that they prefer to believe, because they will still embrace things like medicine when they're sick or use their phones when they need to make a call.
But I don't think the problem is whether it's just this one or that one. It's that we think it has to be just one or the other. When think about it, even if you were a non-physical super intellect and you wanted to bring a physical universe into existence, first, you'd need the stuff to make it out of. Second, you'd have to come up with how all that stuff was going to come together to form things. And third, you'd probably do it in a way that's organized and makes sense.
But do you? If you're an all-powerful God, why do you need to really think about it? Why does life have to exist in a world where things are organized? Can't you make it so an unorganized world can host life? I mean, life can be whatever you want it to be. You just need a little imagination. But anyway, I assume you're going to get into the fine-tuning argument now, so please, go ahead.
Now, I know what some of you might be thinking, so just in case, let me start by clearing a few things up. We believe the world is round, it revolves around the sun, the earth is billions of years old, it wasn't created in 7 days, the Bible is not a scientific textbook, and now take a deep breath here. We're okay with evolution and Big Bang.
A rare sight indeed.
To an extent, which I'll explain later.
Oh, well, that made it a lot less impactful, I guess. So I guess you only really believe in evolution to an extent, kind of like how you, I guess, only believe in science to an extent. How's this any different than just cherry-picking what you like and what you don't like from science? Okay, well, we haven't heard the argument yet, so I'll say more once we get there.
The existence of our entire universe and everything in it comes down to about 30 numbers. Physicists call these the physical constants. Now, these numbers, as I understand them, are fixed values of a fundamental physical condition we find in our universe. For example, the force of gravity or the expansion rate of the universe, right down to the subatomic, such as the mass of a proton or electromagnetic force. Now, here's the amazing part. Each one of these numbers are so perfectly precise and so balanced with one another that if any one of them were off, plus or minus the slimmest fraction, in some cases literally this much, there would be no life and no universe as we know it.
Okay, this really isn't an explanation on how God and science can coexist, but more so you're trying to fit God into the laws of the universe, which I think simply does not work. There are plenty of different explanations we have for the supposed fine-tuning of the universe. For example, many constants appear to be fine-tuned but aren't actually once we understand them better, or that a universe with altered constants can indeed host a universe, though a different looking one, or perhaps the multiverse is a thing, or that the universe's constants fall into place in a top-down fashion. The fact is, we don't know, and it's unreasonable to insert God in places you don't know. So the only reason you're even proposing God here is because you're already previously religious. The thing about claiming that God and science can coexist isn't just about finding places where God could potentially insert himself. It's also about giving us reason on why God is the only explanation in these scenarios, and so far the fine-tuning argument fails to do that.
Now, physicists admit they have no idea how these numbers came to be so perfectly, and they all agree it would be unreasonable to think that it all just happened by chance. So according to, there are only two possible explanations. Either these numbers were set by a super intellect, or they occurred naturally in one universe amidst trillions upon trillions upon trillions upon trillions of other universes that we could never possibly know exist. Now, there's not a shred of scientific evidence to support either of these. So both require a giant.
Okay, for the sake of the argument, let's say not a single shred of evidence exists for the multiverse, which is actually false. We have some preliminary evidence, which is why many physicists push for that idea, but let's just say there isn't. In that case, there are still plenty more explanations that are plausible, such as the ones I named previously. In addition to that, if you don't have evidence, the answer isn't to take a leap of faith. Can you imagine if we did that in any other branch of science? Like, okay, we're not sure what you're sick with and how to treat it, but if you'll just take a leap of faith out of the thousands of drugs we have here in the stockpile, it's stupid, because taking a leap of faith in any direction is stupid. The default position, if there's no evidence for anything, is to say we don't know, and we'll continue to not know until we find out. And that is the most honest position to take. The scientific method is the best method we have to finding truth, so we should be following it whenever we can. And that includes not inserting God or any wild explanation in a situation where you need a leap of faith. But of course, I understand you're just presenting a possibility where God can fit into science here, but you're only doing so because you had a pre-existing notion that God exists, and then you try to weave him in, which is quite literally the complete opposite of the scientific method.
It takes about 2 billion lines of unique handwritten code by over 25,000 engineers and a vast empire of computers and data centers spread throughout the entire globe to run Google. It takes over 3 billion letters of unique genetic code arranged in a precise, specific manner, written inside a cell weighing less than a few thousand millionths of a gram, to run you, a far more complex and superior system than all of Google.
Oh, well, that's perfect then, because Google was created 25 years ago, and us human beings, well, it took 4 billion years to get here. I bet if you gave anyone 4 billion years, they'd be able to not only write the code for all of Google, but also write the genetic pool of human beings.
Now imagine looking at all that Google code, and then me telling you it all just kind of evolved together on its own somehow.
Okay, you aren't even trying to make God and science coexist anymore. You are quite literally just trying to disprove science right now, because science has a very clear explanation on how organisms and genes came about. It was through millions and billions of years of evolution, affected by multiple mechanisms such as mutations and survival of the fittest, and the probabilities fit into our genetic models and simulations. This is so accurate that we can tell what happened in the past just by looking at DNA, such as speciation, isolation, and mutational events. So no, you can't fit God into this one without completely denying a whole branch of science.
Now, as I said, as Catholics, we're okay with evolution, just as long as we're talking about the development of our physical bodies. But evolution has no answers when it comes to the origins of life, or why we, out of every species on Earth, at some point went from this to thinking, speaking, writing, art making, imagining, loving, reflecting, self-aware, reasonable creatures.
We actually have explanations for both. For abiogenesis, I'm not going to go into it because I've probably made a million videos on that topic already, but we have plenty of preliminary evidence on how certain essential parts of essential molecules came into place. And although we haven't figured out the entire mapping specifically, that doesn't mean abiogenesis is false. Then, regarding the rise of humans, that is explained to such a fine detail that your claim is just simply wrong. In a very, very generalized explanation, we first developed bipedalism due to its advantages in many activities to have 2 free limbs. Then we developed intelligence afterwards because the 2 free limbs allowed us to experiment with our hands to create things like tools. And due to that advantage, we thrived as a species in the direction of intelligence, which works in accordance with our bipedalism to work in our survival advantage. The brain gives the idea while the hands create the tools. This is just our way of evolving. While other species worked on things like camouflage, size, longer necks, faster speeds, and things like that, we just happen to develop intelligence. In fact, the view of science is that intelligence will eventually come about for any environment where there is life evolving. So no, what you're doing here is not finding a hole in science and filling it with God as an explanation. You are actively denying science at this point.
So what makes more sense? That life and intelligence and the ability to think and love comes from something that already has life and intelligence and thinks and loves? Or that it comes from this?
Just because something seems more logical to you doesn't mean it's true. You essentially just strawmanned all of evolutionary biology into a single image, and I don't really appreciate that, good sir. But that's what creationists do, don't they? They don't really understand science, so they way oversimplify concepts to a point where it doesn't even represent the original idea anymore. Ridiculous.
And Big Bang? Well, it was a Catholic priest who came up with the idea, so we're okay with it.
So if the person who came up with it was an atheist, you wouldn't be okay with it anymore. Gotcha. I came into this expecting you to be kind of reasonable. Like, for example, you would accept everything in evolution and science, but then say, well, God could still fit into this by watching over the entire process, in which my response would have been something like, there's no need to fit an intelligent being in all of this, blah, 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 you know the drill. But as I watched this, I realized this ended up being just a regular science denying video after all, and now I feel foolish for even giving you the benefit of the doubt. Anyway, that'll do it for today. Thank you to the usual Fireshard Alan Morton, Miss Fixit, Rick Klen, and I'll probably see you in 1.5 weeks or so.